You know, I was gonna talk about election fortification today, but then I saw the story, and, well, there wasn't a whole lot else that went through my mind after seeing what happened in Afghanistan over the past few hours, at least from when I'm recording this video, because 13 service members are dead, and there is about 20 wounded. That's the most recent report that at least I've gotten. It might be more by this point, since there are 10 that are critically injured, and there's a whole lot more civilian casualties that also happened. It's hard to understate exactly how terrible Biden has been on Afghanistan, and this is just another example of which. And this attack was actually carried out by ISIS, and, well, Biden did actually learn something over the course of the past week. You see, last time something terrible happened that he didn't expect at all, Biden decided that he was going to wait a couple of days before he was going to actually talk about it. Of course, then backtracking and talking about it the next day because everyone said that's a bad idea. And so, today, he did it within just a few hours, though I will say you can see the drugs in his eyes. And he looked somehow even more sleepy than he normally does. So, he at least got through the press conference okay, but I don't think he learned any more than the one thing. And there is a lot of clips.
Because I think what America says matters. What we say we're going to do in the context in which we say we're going to do it, that we do it, unless something exceptional changes. The reason why, whether my friend will acknowledge it or has reported it, the reason why there were no attacks on Americans, as you said, from the date until I came into office, was because the commitment was made by President Trump, I will be out by May 1st. In the meantime, you agree not to attack any Americans. That was the deal. That's why no American was attacked.
So a lot of examples of his bumbling and mumbling and problems, but I want to just go through a few. And first thing we have to talk about is ISIS-K. It's one of the most important, prominent things that you're going to see all throughout the speech if you decide to watch it and risk falling into a coma. But he says ISIS-K over and over again, continuing the tradition, apparently, of Democratic presidents refusing to just say the word ISIS. Because, remember, back in the day when Barack Obama kept calling ISIS ISIL, despite it not being called that. And now we have a new example of this. Biden, of course, refusing to acknowledge that this is the exact same organization that he was calling the JV team not a decade ago. And it is worth it to mention that this is a very interesting development, particularly on the idea of ISIS, because, well, Biden and his administration more particularly were really underestimating the threat of ISIS. And this is a familiar story if anyone has been following the Afghanistan coverage more broadly, because this isn't the first time that the Biden administration has been underestimating a threat and continuing to underestimate a threat until the point where it comes to bite them in the butt, and then they have to scramble for a media narrative. And this happened not only with the Taliban, where it wasn't just a few hours before Taliban actually took control of the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, where the Biden administration began to acknowledge that there was a threat. And once again, right here, they didn't think there was a threat from ISIS until the moment this attack occurred.
Thanks. Mr. President, what about ISIS and the threat that Americans face now?
And it's worth it to mention that comparing these statistics of 13 dead to last year's total servicemen dead for America, period, is quite staggering, because he's already 2 up from what happened in the entire last year, just in a day. That is Biden's record. Immediately, as soon as Trump leaves office, everything falls apart. And it's quite funny to see the Democrat media narratives, and the Democrat narratives altogether, about this particular incident, and every incident which has happened under Biden. Because whether it be the migrant crisis, or it be Afghanistan Part 1, or Afghanistan Part 2 now, the media and many partisan Democrats continue to do just one thing: blame Trump. And in these two particular instances, the migrant crisis and Afghanistan, it is the most baffling of all of them. Because in these two particular incidences, what they have to claim is that Trump was keeping it entirely under control the entirety of his administration, continuing on until the day he left. And then, once Biden gets in, suddenly everything goes bad. But this was all planned by Trump. You see, Trump was just such a big-brained man that he made it so that the migrant crisis began literally the day he left. He somehow has control over the waves of migrants coming into the country, you see. And when it comes to Afghanistan, he's somehow able to keep the situation entirely stable with basically nothing happening on the Taliban front or Afghanistan front whatsoever for an entire year change until April, when, wouldn't you know it, Biden announces that he's going back on the deal. That's what always gets missed in these discussions on left-wing circles and these left-wing memes that get shared around, saying it's Trump's fault because it was Trump's plan and all that, despite the fact that, of course, it wasn't Trump's plan. But going back to Biden's initial speech, there is a number of quite interesting quotes here. I mean, he says that he's going to track down the ISIS perpetrators of this, the leaders of ISIS, and track them down and go to the ends of the earth to find out where they are and murder them. Which is a good thing. That's exactly what a foreign policy leader should be saying. But it is worth it to mention that he didn't rule out the idea that he's going to stay in Afghanistan in order to do this, which should give you all a bit of a wake-up call, because, well, that means we're probably not done. Hey, anyone seeing the priming of the pump yet? It's amazing to see how people are still falling for this. Well, actually, I should take that back, because, well, some people aren't. The percentage of people who are actually falling for this crap is just 34% of the population, which I don't feel like should be a victory, but hey, it's better than 50-50, right? Yeah, 54%, in fact, are explicitly saying they don't trust Biden when he talks about Afghanistan. And after the multiple failures and multiple underestimations of the threats in Afghanistan, it is perfectly reasonable to see why. It's worth it to mention at this point that the reason that people and U.S. citizens are still in Afghanistan at this point and were able to be there at all is because the Biden administration was underestimating how quickly the Taliban would take over. They were thinking that Afghanistan would be up for a few months, and they were saying this up until the 13th. That's not 2 days until the Taliban completely takes over the country, and they didn't see it until just hours beforehand. And even then, they didn't want to actually talk about that until they had a few days for it to simmer off and for them to actually have a strategy for media coverage. That's what the Biden administration has been doing this entire time. But something I want to talk about is why are the establishment so profoundly ineffective about foreign policy? Because Donald Trump, someone who has no experience in politics, someone who has very little experience in foreign policy outside of his foreign business dealings, was able to do this almost perfectly. I mean, I had my criticisms of Trump's foreign policy at times throughout his administration, but I must come to admit that basically every single thing he did ended up, in the long term, being extremely good for American foreign policy. Even the stuff I honestly really do disagree with, whether it be the Syrian strikes, certain tariffs on whether it be Mexico or some other country, every single thing he did promoted an image of America across the world as an America that is willing to pull the trigger, willing to actually take the stand if our enemies cross the line. This is as opposed to, say, Barack Obama, who made up multiple red lines in many different areas and continued to let our enemies break them over and over again and not do anything. Obama was never respected in any other country. They pretended to be nice to him, sure. All of our European friends continue to dollop praise on him over and over and over again. But they never respected him. People respected Trump because they knew his threats had weight behind them. And even if he didn't make a threat, sometimes he'd still do something sort of off the wall. That made him, first of all, unpredictable, which is very good in foreign policy. And second of all, it made his threats, well, have weight, and to go back to that analogy. And when it comes to the establishment politicians, well, they're famously hesitant to pull the trigger. Whether it be Bill Clinton back in the 90s, refusing when Osama bin Laden's head is given to him on a platter, or whether it be Barack Obama deliberating for days as to whether to take the shot later on in time, it has been shown over and over again that Democrats and establishment more broadly, rhinos certainly very much included, are unwilling to finish the job. And the reason for this is because they want a forever war. If you ever finish the job, if you actually glass these people and make it so that their threat is simply non-existent, military spending is going to dry up real quick now, isn't it? That is the difference between Donald Trump and the establishment. Donald Trump was very utilitarian about his foreign policy, which is exactly the sort of policy you want to have. It means that he was willing to put tariffs on China, tariffs that really put a lot of pressure on their economy, despite being fairly light in a lot of ways. He was also willing to put tariffs on Mexico, which ended up working really well in the long term because of all the deals that he was able to do later on in his presidency. He was also able to do things like the Syrian strikes and make it extremely clear that he wasn't going to back off defending Israel, leading to the Abraham Accords. All of these things are massive foreign policy successes, and the idea from many people on the left that this was all a ruse, that he was keeping it all together throughout his entire presidency, and it was only so that when Biden got in, because of course he knew Biden was going to get in 2021, then it would all fall apart. Only after the fact, and of course only after Biden already reversed much of his foreign policy at that point. It's amazing. And, you know, the situation in Afghanistan, to take a quote from Biden, it really is like anything we've ever seen in history. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed that video, do in fact subscribe down below and go check out my links to where I am on other sites. I'm also on BitChute, I'm on Minds, I'm on Gab, I'm on Parler, I'm on Odyssey, Rumble, Brighteon, all those places. I'm KelKidman, this has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.